In 2010, the Disney Animation Studio gave the world a brighter take on a classically grim fairy tale.
In 2021, we take our second of 3 trips back to Scotland.
The movie is Tangled.
The whiskey is Glenmorangie, the Cadboll Estate.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 2010 Walt Disney Animated Studios film, Tangled. Brad, this is one of your selections for our Season 5 lineup. Explain yourself, sir.
So I was like, I have to get at least one animated film in here. I'm pretty sure that we've had at least one animated film every season. Is that correct?
At least.
At least one, maybe two. And I was thinking about animated films that might not hit everybody's classic list, but is something that I love. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the two movies that stood out to me were Wreck-It Ralph and Tangled.
Yeah.
And I feel like they both came out at a similar time around, was Wreck-It Ralph 2010, 2011?
It might have been like 2012. But yeah, I mean, in the same general ballpark area.
The same era. And those are two of more modern animated films, even though it's 2021, it's almost 2022. Those movies are like 12 years old by now. But they felt like movies that everybody loved them when they came out, and then I've never heard anybody talk about them again. And so for me, I just really wanted to jump onto one of those two. Tangled was the one that stood out to me, and I said, you know what, we're doing Tangled.
Yeah. I think we need to just do a half season or something where we just put a ton of animated movies in that are, like you said, not necessarily classics, but I want to talk about How to Train Your Dragon. I want to talk about...
Oh, dude.
I want to talk about Kung Fu Panda, the first one. I want to talk about Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I just watched that again. That movie's hilarious. There's so many animated movies that are not quite at the level of A Beauty and the Beast, but that still have so much to offer the world.
Yeah, great rewatchability, funny and intelligent dialogue. Honestly, I was listening back to our charade episode with Patrick H. Willems.
Well, of course. Why wouldn't you?
Obviously. Why wouldn't you? And I love that we were discussing the intelligent dialogue in that movie. And I feel like sometimes the few places in modern cinema that you get genuinely intelligent dialogue can be in animated films. I don't know what it is, but it seems like the writers just stepped their game up a little bit.
I think part of it is every one of these movies follows the same formula, and you know exactly what needs to be said in every scene. And so it becomes a question of either okay, how do we subvert this, or how do we say it in a way that it's never been said out loud before? How do we give you a really good quote here? And I think it really does kind of make writers kind of be on their toes a little bit. And you're absolutely right. I didn't even think about that till now, and I think this movie does a really, really good job of that, Brad. So let's get into talking about it here. I really like this movie, and I have been on record for 9 years now since Frozen came out, saying that I think Tangled is better than Frozen. And I still have lots of thoughts on the comparison between those two movies, having just watched Tangled again. I think they both do their own thing really well, but I think that both of these movies are very different from each other in a way that maybe comparing them is not quite fair.
Yeah, no, 100%. If you want me to just start shitting on Frozen, I can.
Oh, dude, let's do it.
But the big thing for me with Frozen, and honestly, I think that this is the big problem for Disney as a whole, whether it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not as much maybe, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's their animated films, they're just trying too hard. It just felt like with Frozen especially, it signaled the start of a new Disney era where they just pandered to the masses, if you will. Mm-hmm. The way that they wrote the songs you could tell that they wanted them to be pop hit songs.
Yeah.
Like they weren't writing good music anymore the way they were in the 90s. Honestly, the way they did in Tangled with the love theme in Tangled.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they were just writing things that were somewhat catchy, vague, and like strangely empowering. And that's their shindig. That's their formula now to make billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it just kind of drives me nuts, man.
I mean, I do think that watching this movie, I can see how Frozen came out of this movie in a lot of ways, obviously. But like even the songs, and I think that the song I See the Light is, you know, the one you're talking about, the love theme of this movie, the ballad, is the best song of any Disney movie in the 21st century. Like it is just an impeccable song. But I feel like maybe the rest of the songs in this movie, they're on the verge of, okay, are we going to go the classical Beauty and the Beast, Alan Menken route with this? Or are we going to go pop hit with this? And like the first song that Mandy Moore sings, I don't even remember how it goes. And I think that's kind of an indictment on this movie. Like there are really great things in here. And there are also things where it's like, yeah, we point to Frozen as like this watershed moment of, oh, okay, they're turning the corner into just doing like these poppy kind of songs now. But I think the seeds were planted before that. And you can kind of see the tension between those two styles of making a Disney princess movie here in this movie, for better or for worse.
Well, and in the end, in my opinion, Tangled was the better off for that tension that it held between old school Disney and the new direction they were moving in.
Well, Brad, we've kind of talked around the movie for a few minutes now, and we've already started shitting on Frozen. So, I mean, we're off to a really good start here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude.
But it's time for you to break this movie down. Okay. We're going to move into Brad Explains. This is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the movie that he has just seen often for the first time. That is very obviously not the case today. For those in our audience who may not have seen Tangled, can you give us 60 seconds on the plot of this movie?
The film Tangled is about a young girl named Rapunzel who has magic hair. The hair will get rid of aging, it will heal wounds, and you have to sing a cool song to get it to do its magic powers. She is stolen away from her parents when she's a baby. The witch Gothel tells her that she is her mother and keeps her hidden away from the world, which is dangerous and scary. Flynn Rider is a thief who steals a crown from the kingdom that Rapunzel is from. In his escape, he stumbles upon Rapunzel's hiding place, and she convinces him through force to take her to see these floating lights that go out every year on her birthday. On the way, they run into trouble. They fall in love with one another. They're chased by a horse. She has a cute little gecko, and they're tricked by Mother Gothel in different locations. It's a wild ride. I freaking love Tangled, Bob.
Yeah, so this is Disney's adaptation of the Rapunzel story. Brad, I'm going to be honest with you. I probably should have looked up like the actual fairy tale of Rapunzel before we recorded this. I did not.
Brutal.
Yeah, can you fill me in? Because I'm sure it has a very German ending that Disney did not adopt.
Yeah, I honestly don't know everything about it, but what I do remember is that this knight comes to help Rapunzel. He hears about the girl trapped in the tower. And I don't remember all of the inner workings of the story, but I do remember that at some point, crows that the witch calls peck the eyes out of the knight coming to save her, and he falls out of the tower like, 100 feet down into a patch of brambles and dies.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah. I mean, as you
it's
do.
a great time, man. Yeah.
I mean, the lesson of that story is mind your own business, knight.
Yeah, exactly, man. Don't go chasing after what ain't yours.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man. So let's talk about Tangled in the kind of pantheon of Disney movies here. So this was Disney's self-reported, I don't know how they're counting, but it was their 50th animated film. And I really, really love what they did here, especially with the style of animation. So I was reading up a little bit on it, and apparently this movie cost an exorbitant amount of money to make because they were blending a lot of traditionally drawn elements with some CGI elements, and there's it got really technical in terms of how they parsed out how it was different than other CGI movies. But Disney doesn't release their budget figures or what a movie ended up costing. People estimate this movie cost almost $260 million to make, which would make it one of the most expensive films of all time, on par with like an Avengers movie, which is really nuts to me. Because, I mean, this movie looks incredible. But if you had said like, "Hey, this or Avengers Endgame, which cost more?" I'm not sure that I would have leaned towards Tangled.
I mean, yeah, dude, its worldwide box though brought in $592 million.
So really, it just kind of broke even, for being honest.
Yeah, yeah, that's insane, man. $260 million. Bob, sometimes we talk about movies and the money they make. I can imagine $100,000. I can fathom that in my brain. I can even maybe almost fathom $1 million. Like having that much money, understanding what it looks like, what it can get you. I can't fathom $260 million. Just can't.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so easy to talk about.
Yeah.
But also, I need to make sure that you understand that, like, there's not just like a vault at Disney with like this money stacked up to the ceiling and they have to go ask like Mickey Mouse every time they need to.
No. They got to go ask Scrooge.
Scrooge McDuck.
They have to convert it from gold coins into dollars.
Exactly. All right, man, let's start talking about the movie itself. So one thing that immediately jumped out to me is the character design of Rapunzel. And I noticed it when I first watched it in the theater. I noticed it again this time. These Disney princesses, by and large, are teenage girls. And for most of Disney's history, they have made them look like very grown-up, voluptuous women.
Yep.
And, you know, even like Ariel, you could kind of tell that she's a teenager in that movie, but then they put her in like a bikini. And it's like, it gets very weird when you think about how young she's supposed to be. This movie, Rapunzel is on the eve of her 18th birthday. And I felt like the way they designed her face, the fact that she has like a slight overbite, like the design of her teeth, it's so interesting how like a design element that small can really do wonders because she has this very girlish look to her. And I think it really does help and benefit the movie that like, yes, like she's a very pretty girl, but it doesn't like immediately sexualize her in that way. Like you always are aware of the fact that like, she's a very young, innocent, naive girl, and like we're not gonna let anyone in the audience like go any further than that with this character design. I thought it was a great touch.
Dude, I think that Rapunzel is one of the best written animated characters of all time. Like,
why is that?
From the way that she was visually designed, I'm with you 100%. But the actions that they have her take, the way she interacts with people around her, I genuinely feel like she is one of the most honest representations in a fantasy world you will ever get of an 18-year-old girl. Like, I think that, I might get in trouble for this. If you don't like my take on this, that's totally fine. What I do think is that Tangled is actually the best representation of true female empowerment rather than any of the other Disney movies that have followed since. And the reason is that they genuinely represent Rapunzel as a true agent of choice, right? That she controls her choices as best as she can. She has forces around her that are trying to control her, like her fake mother, the witch Gothel. Flynn tries to control her at certain points and use his charm to have her give back the crown to him. And he tries to play on her emotions and force her to go back and be like, oh, I'll let you out of the deals. You know, you can be a good daughter, head back. But in the end, what they do with Rapunzel is that they make her fiercely her own person. And I think for me, it's a beautiful coming of age film where you see Rapunzel on the verge of adulthood, on the verge of becoming 18, learn how to make choices for herself, learn how to stand up for herself, how to fight, how to engage with the world around her. And they do it in a way that never feels forced. It never feels like, oh, look at us, we're making a woman powerful. No, like they make her silly. They make her scared. They make her uncertain of her choices at times, just like real human beings.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it's the human side of Rapunzel, like that you get the first time she touches grass and rushes into the river to see the world around her. And then they finally make it out of the little hidden valley that she's in. And I love that little montage of her running around screaming that she's free and then that she's a terrible daughter and that there's scary things out there. Like, it just makes her a real person who is growing into her ability to choose. And like I said, I think that is one of the most empowering things that you can represent for anyone, for a man or a woman.
Yeah, man, I'm totally with you. I think that it does such a good job of capturing young adulthood, where you are clearly old enough to know what you want at this point, and you also are feeling so constrained by those things around you that have been influenced, and the guilt of leaving home and things like that. And obviously, we're going to talk about the toxic atmosphere. That the reason she feels guilty is not for a healthy reason. But
what are you talking about, man? There's nothing toxic going on.
How do you think I'm raising my kids? Come on. But I do want to kind of hone in on, again, the comparison between this and Frozen. And I think I realized watching this that, you can always see with a successful animated movie the things that influenced it and the things that it ended up influencing, right? Because when Disney makes money, they say, that thing, let's do that thing again, because money, we'll make more of it. And we're going to make twice as much this time because people liked it the first time. So when Little Mermaid was successful, they said, do that in a castle and call it Beauty and the Beast. And all the little sidekicks that are in Little Mermaid are there in Beauty and the Beast. And I think they did it better, but let's be honest, it's the same cast of characters essentially. And I think in this movie, they took what was kind of like a burgeoning subgenre, which was like the self-aware fairy tale, right? So this kicked off in 2000 with Shrek, or 2001 with Shrek, which is a movie that I have a very complicated relationship. I don't really like Shrek that much, and I know everybody on the internet loves it, but it was the first time that they really head-on addressed the cliches of the genre, and they made fun of them. And then Disney,
I will say one thing about Shrek.
Yeah, go for it.
The animation, the graphics of that movie have not held up well.
No, it is very obviously a 20-year-old movie in terms of computer graphics. But so, that ends up influencing movies like Enchanted, which comes out in 2007, which is a movie I absolutely love. I hope we talk about that someday. But that's another one of those movies where, Disney took the Shrek kind of blueprint and they said, yes, we can poke fun at ourselves a little bit, but at the end of the day, even if we're poking fun at ourselves, we're still telling a Disney princess movie. So it became kind of like a meta thing, right? And then they come out with Tangled, and I think they improve on that a little bit more. But then by the time they get to Frozen, what I think they end up doing is they take the Rapunzel character and they just split her in two. And they give all of the personality and the wonder and the curiosity to Anna's character. And they take the the feminist female empowerment and agency, and they give that to Elsa's character. And I think both characters suffer because with Anna's character, she sometimes seems a little bit, flighty, I guess might be the word. And then
ditzy.
With not even just ditzy, but just like lacking substance, And then with Elsa's character, she's so self-serious that she becomes a really boring character. I did not care to spend time with her in that movie. And I think that Tangled is the last time where Disney really did a great job of marrying somebody with really strong ideals and somebody that is an incredible role model with also just being a very compelling and enjoyable character.
Yeah, dude, I am so, I rhapsodized for, 5 minutes about it already. So I'll just simply say this. I'm with you, dude. I think Disney hit the nail on the head with Tangled in a lot of different ways. But really, for me, one of the best parts of this movie was the relationship between Flynn Rider and Rapunzel. And so I think we have to talk about Zachary Levi and Mandy Moore right now because they are so good in this movie together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of voice performances, I think they're two of the best that Disney's had in a long, long time. And I don't always necessarily agree with some of the things they make them say or do. I think that Flynn Rider's character is a little too silly for a little too long. But like what the actors behind the mic are doing is really, really fantastic work.
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the scenes that encapsulates the beauty of their voice performance so well is when the dam breaks and they get stuck in the little cave that has the water filling up. And you finally see Flynn Rider break a little bit. And he tells her, my name's actually Eugene Fitzpatrick. I was an orphan. And the way that Zachary Levi voices that moment, you feel his voice become real. Like you feel the heart behind his words. Somebody ought to know this before we die. And then on the opposite end of it, you have Mandy Moore, who is always sincere and earnest. You see her hit a point where she goes, well, I have magic hair. And then the excitement in her voice, and it's not just excitement, it's this enthusiasm that maybe we can escape. There's like that little bit of hope that she infuses into her voice when she goes, I have magic hair that glows. And it leads them out. It helps them escape. I just think that little scene just is a perfect little moment where you get to see why the two of them are so brilliant and why they were perfect choices for the lead roles in this film.
Yeah, totally agree, man. I do want to zero in on that I see the light scene, because if there's one scene in this movie that I could talk about for like an hour, it's that scene. It's I've been singing that song nonstop for like a week. I love that song. And on top of the fact that the song is so good and that it is kind of the romantic, climax of the film, what the filmmakers do right before it is like you're watching Flynn and Rapunzel and they finally get to the kingdom, and the whole deal is like she wants to go see these lanterns that are being released because the king and queen, after their daughter was kidnapped, they release lanterns every year on her birthday in hopes that she'll see them and come home. And Rapunzel has seen them from her tower for 18 years and she wants to go see them in person. And so there's this whole blackmail subplot that she gets Flynn to take her into the kingdom. They go out on this kind of rowboat and they're out like in the bay or whatever, watching the lanterns rise from the kingdom. But right before that, they cut to the inside and you see the king and queen, who are characters that like you have spent no time with throughout this movie. And you watch these like grieving parents getting ready to perform this ritual that they have done for 18 years. And it's this really kind of like grounding moment in the movie where, from Rapunzel's perspective, like it's just these really pretty lights, and I've been so excited to see them forever. And like vicariously as the audience, we're living through her. We want to see these pretty lights. But then we get taken behind the scenes, and for these people, like it is not a display of pretty lights. As far as they know, like their kid might be dead. And this is like their way of memorializing her. And it is like this really profound moment where these two older, wiser people are sharing this moment of like ritualistic grief. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah.
And then when you actually see those lights go up, for Rapunzel, it is this awe-inspiring, beautiful, romantic moment, and Flynn's having a romantic moment. But you also know as the audience that there is a set of parents behind this for whom this is like a much deeper and more profound thing. And I think that little decision by the filmmakers, especially as a parent, I'm watching that and like I have tears in my eyes because of course I'm caught up in the visuals, but I'm also caught up in the subtext of what's happening in that scene.
Well, and in the midst of that scene, you also get these little beautiful touches, whether it was the people who wrote the script behind the animation or just somebody decided to do it this way. But when the king and queen light off their lantern, the rest of the city starts to light their lantern, and it follows a path down this like main road away from the castle. And I never noticed this before, but Haley was like, oh, it's really cool that they lit the lanterns in a pattern that looks like Rapunzel's hair.
Oh, I never thought about that.
And my mind just like melted. I was like, that's freaking brilliant. And we rewound it and watched it again. And sure enough, the lanterns light up in this beautiful pattern.
Yeah.
The exact same way that Rapunzel's hair lights up when she sings the song.
That's incredible. I didn't even think about that.
I was like, I was like, my wife is so much better at film analysis than I am.
I gotta say though, man, there is just something so like elementally incredible about setting your scene in like a lake covered in paper lanterns. Like,
dude, like the beautiful red orange hues.
Oh my gosh. Like it is, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you ever had like a romantic moment at Christmas time. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like there's a reason Christmas movies are more romantic than movies that are set on like the 4th of July. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's something about that warm lighting, and it creates an atmosphere in this movie that, like, even if you were a real life Rapunzel in that kind of environment, it wouldn't look exactly the same. It's something that you can only see in the movies. And I like watching that scene. I'm like, this is a preposterous setting. And yet, like, it is the most I've bought into a movie in forever. Cause I'm just like, yes, whatever you're doing on screen, I don't care about the physics of it. I don't care about any of it. Like, I'm on board for this because this looks amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that at least 200 of the $260 million was spent animating that scene.
Just that scene, yeah.
just drawing thousands of lanterns.
Oh, man. Well, Brad, I think we're off to a good start talking about this movie, but it's time for us to take a break. So what do you say we try this 15-year aged Glenmorangie Cadboll Estate?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are checking out Glenmorangie, the Cadboll Estate, 15-year. Brad, I'm super pumped for this. This, I think, is the most aged Glenmorangie we've ever had so far.
I believe it is.
Quinta Rubin was 14, right? And so this is a year older than that.
Bob, I'm not going to lie. I so often talk about the Glenmorangie Quinta Rubin that, like, as you were saying the word Glenmorangie and getting near the end, it felt weird to hear somebody say Glenmorangie and not Quinta Rubin following it.
It's like a reflexive thing now for us.
It is. It's a muscle. There's the muscle memory there, man.
So today we're not doing the Quinta Rubin, but we're doing the Cadboll Estate. Now, what this whiskey is, Brad, is it is the first release from Glenmorangie that is completely made from barley that was grown on their own property, the Cadboll Estate. So apparently they've always been growing their own barley that gets used kind of in the mash bill and mixed in with other sources of malted barley. But this is completely from the Glenmorangie Cadboll Estate property. It's aged for 15 years, like we said, in first fill American ex-bourbon casks. So I'm really, really pumped. This is probably going to have close to the flavor profile of your standard Glenmorangie. It's not finished off in any sort of like wine barrel or anything like that. It's just kind of like a straightforward, but a limited edition whiskey. So yeah, man, let's just dive right in. Brad, as we nose this Glenmorangie 15 Cadboll Estate, what are you picking up on the nose?
Bob, for so many different scotches, I've realized that there's just a specific scent on every single scotch that sets it apart from Irish whiskeys, from bourbons, from ryes, from anything else. And I've realized the one thing in common, this is going to be the most amateurish take ever given on this podcast. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
It must be barley. Like, I've always tried to place like a name for this note that I always get, and I have no like memory for it. I have no like nostalgic feeling towards something in my childhood about it. I just don't know what it is. And I just realized, what do all scotches have in common? Barley. It must be barley that I'm smelling.
Yeah, when in doubt, just say malty. It smells malty.
It smells malty, like malted barley. There's not a strong barley note on it, but it's there. For me, I felt like there's just some really beautiful notes of cherry, almost like a really ripe peach, and then a little bit of oakiness. It's a really creamy and smooth nose that I like a lot. I'll give it an 8.5.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. I'm also going to give it an 8.5. For me, the predominant notes are green apple, like a really juicy green apple, and peach, like you said. There's a lot of fruit going on here. I think I do get a little bit of grapefruit, like there's definitely some citrus there as well. And then I had like a really interesting thing going on with the barley, like you said, Brad. It almost smells like I keep getting wisps of like a really hoppy beer Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't smell like hops necessarily, but it kind of reminds me of like a citrus IPA or something like that, but just a little wisp. And then it kind of goes back into those very, very bright whiskey notes again. I like this a lot. I'm going to give it an 8.5.
Yeah. And then I get into the taste, and Bob, I don't know if I've ever had such a jump that I do with this Cadboll Estate. It's really unexpectedly saline forward for me. There's little bits of like citrus and peach coming through. It's a really good palate. It's just not what I expected at all. I think I'll give it a 7.5.
So I just took my first sip. I'm drinking this one live, actually. What I'm getting on this is, it goes into your kind of standard Glenmorangie Scotchy flavor profile. And then it gets very, very bitter towards the end. And not bitter in a way that's like, oh, it's too over oaked or anything like that. But it's like really dark black coffee bean and really dark cocoa for me.
Yeah.
And I like it a lot, but it's not even like, oh, I really like dark chocolate, because your dark chocolate's sweetened a little bit. It's like straight cocoa and or straight dark roast coffee bean. So if you're not into whiskeys that really tip into the kind of like herbal, earthy bitterness side, I don't know if this one's for you. And I really like the flavor, but I was expecting to have a little bit of that fruit sweetness on the palate here. And I don't think there's really, hardly any sweetness here at all, Brad. And especially as it gets to the back of your palate and then closer to the finish, I think all that sweetness really goes away. So I am going to give it an 8 out of 10 on the taste. And then on the finish, it's a very pleasant finish, mouth-watering. It's not tannic. It doesn't dry your mouth out at all. But there's not much of a burn on the way down. It drinks kind of like water, if I'm being honest with you, Brad. It's pretty light-bodied. I like the finish, but again, it just seems like the taste and the finish are so vastly different from what we got on the nose. I'll give the finish a 7 out of 10.
I do like the finish a little more than the palate. It's really nice and smooth. You get a bit of that oakiness from the time it's spent in the American oak casks. There's a little bit of unexpected spice for me that comes through on the end that for me, when you mentioned IPA at the start of this is where I get a little bit of that bitter IPA hops on the finish. It's not enough to really mark it down at all for me. I think I'll give it an 8 on the finish.
I will say that the whiskey we had last week and this one are probably the two smokiest Glenmorangies that I've had yet. And they're really not known for peat. And I don't get peat on this, but it just has an almost like ashy, burnt to a crisp kind of flavor to it in certain elements here. And it's not, like I said, it's not something I'm used to getting on Glenmorangie at all. I think that is throwing me a little bit here. So when I tip into the balance score, I think that's where this one kind of suffers. And I think, honestly, Brad, I'm going to come out to a score ultimately today that's lower than what I actually think of this product. Because I actually like every component part of this experience quite a bit. And I think this is a good whiskey. But based on the metric that you and I have laid out, like, it's not necessarily a very well-balanced whiskey in terms of offering a cohesive experience, or I guess cohesive would be the word.
Yeah.
Consistent. Yeah.
I'm with you, dude. I think everything you just said is where I'm at. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 on balance.
Yeah, I'll do the same. So right now, without taking price into account, we are at I'm at a 30.5 out of 40. And like I said, I would already say that I think this is better than a 30 out of 40 in terms of what you're getting in the glass. It's not necessarily the best balanced thing I've ever had, but I think each individual element of it is really, really well done. And that's why I find this to be kind of a confusing tasting experience, Brad.
Yeah, and really, it takes us into our value score, which in a certain way, we set it apart from the rest of the scores because this is just purely based on, is this a good purchase, to take out of my bank account? For me, what I'm seeing for this, Bob, is about a $90 price tag in the US. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, prices are all over the place because sometimes vendors will price things out knowing that they're going to charge you an arm and a leg for shipping, and so they'll take some of it off the retail. So the lowest I'm seeing online is about $75. The higher end I'm seeing is about $105. So yeah, Brad, I think that 90 is a pretty safe estimate for this one.
If we're talking $90 for this, I'm going to give it a 4.5 on value. I think that there's just such a solid amount of choices in the Glenmorangie lineup that cost less money that for me, this is kind of a bit of a hard sell for me, just purely based on what's in the bottle.
So let me ask this. Okay, so first of all, in Ohio, it's actually $84.99. So I mean, it's only $5 less. But would that tick up your value score at all?
No, I think 85 to 90 feels like the same amount for me.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm actually going to give this a 6 out of 10 on value because knowing that it is a limited edition product, that it's a very special product to them, that it was, grown and harvested in a way that's not typical for them, I understand that it's going to be a little bit pricier. And because of that, I actually think that if you had just sat this in front of me and said this is like an $80 to $90 scotch, based on drinking it, I actually think that sounds about right. This is pretty complex. And even though it's not the most cohesive experience we've ever had, I think that you can taste the quality in the glass here. So I'm actually okay with it being at the $85 range. Brad, I'm coming out to a 36.5 out of 50. Where are you at?
I'm just barely beneath you at a 35.5.
All right, so that's bringing us out to a 72 out of 100 or a 36 out of 50. I actually am going to recommend this, even though it may have sounded like we weren't as big of fans of this because it is kind of a really varied drinking experience. I still found it to be a really pleasant one. I still found it to be a really enjoyable one. So if you see it at a bar, absolutely give it a try. I'm going to leave it up to you whether you want to buy a bottle of this. If you've had the Glenmorangie flavor profile before, I think this does kind of fit right in there, albeit maybe not in the same kind of consistent from start to finish way.
Yeah, it's a little more unique than the other Glenmorangie offerings we've had. But honestly, Bob, I'm with you. I would definitely recommend the Cadboll Estate. I think they're doing something interesting and fun and ultimately tasty with this product. Yeah, it's weird when I feel like we're negative on something, but the only reason we're hard on it is because of how freaking amazing they are at making whiskey. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if Canadian Mist came out with a special limited edition release, we might just be a little bit nicer because, it's starting off at a little bit of a lower bar. So honestly, guys, Glenmorangie continues to put out phenomenal whiskey that you really need to give a try.
All right. Well, we still have another Glenmorangie in our lineup. We're going to be trying the 18-year next week. I cannot wait for that one. But before us right now, Brad, is the task of finishing our review of the movie Tangled. So what do you say we get back to it?
Let's get to it.
All right, that was Glenmorangie 15 Cadboll Estate, a whiskey that we both really liked. We're getting back into talking about a movie that we both really like, Tangled. Brad, when they first announced this movie, it was just called Disney's Rapunzel, and they changed the name to Tangled, a few months before the movie's release, and it caused kind of a stir online, as these things always do, because people online are always looking for something to be outraged about. I do think they had kind of a legitimate complaint, because reading up on it, apparently, Disney was really going heavy in promoting Flynn Rider as much as they were promoting Rapunzel, in their promotional stuff here for the movie. But honestly, when you listen to the explanation from behind the scenes of why they did it, they said, listen, if we call our movie Rapunzel, there is, whether we like it or not, a whole segment of our audience, a potential audience that just would not come see this movie because they think it's a movie that's for small girls. And honestly, what they're trying to make is what they call a 4-quadrant movie. And that is the 4 quadrants are young people, old people, men, and women. And if you can hit all 4 quadrants, you've got a hit on your hand. And what Disney has done in the years since this movie came out is make that into a science. That's exactly what the Marvel movies are. They are designed to be as inoffensive and crowd pleasing as possible.
Yep.
But I think when you do it right, you get a movie like this, because I really do think this is a truly classic example of a movie that really does a service to everyone who could watch it. It has the stuff for kids. It has the stuff for adults. It has the romantic subplot. It has the female empowerment plot. But then also the Flynn Rider stuff, when he's getting chased on the top of the castle and they have to jump off and go over that. They hit a roof, him and the horse. and it's like this really enthralling chase scene towards the end of the movie, I realized, oh, this is like a swashbuckler. It's not just a movie about, this girl with long hair. They're really doing this, and they're doing it well. The action scenes in this movie are really brilliantly choreographed. There's some really inventive kind of camera movements that they do in this movie as well. But it hit a certain point towards the end where I was so invested in the swashbuckling, Errol Flynn, Robin Hood kind of elements of it that I was impressed that they had gotten to that point with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it really even had some like Pirates of the Caribbean, Jack Sparrow kind of vibes to it when he's escaping from guards and they're off, to the races, basically. Dude, I think that the action in this movie is just choreographed so well. Even, dude, one of the best shots of the movie is when Rapunzel is waiting for Flynn to come back. He's taking the crown to the twins that he stole it from, and he's trying to get rid of it so that he can just be with Rapunzel. And she's waiting for him. She sees him walking through the midst, and boom, it splits in two into the twins, and they come out of the shadows. I think that the way that they choreograph action in this film, whether it's in small moments like that, where it's not like active fighting action, but it's a slow, menacing movement, all the way to when Flynn is being taken to be executed and he notices the little unicorn and then the guards just get destroyed by all of these bandits. The writing for the action scenes in this film is just impeccable.
All right, man. Am I allowed to have a couple nitpicks here?
Yeah, dude.
All right.
Go for it.
I wrote down some nitpicks, and I guess I'll get, let me knock out my biggest issue with the film now, because that way the nitpicks seem smaller and smaller as I go. But I think my big issue with this movie, and the thing that's going to keep me from giving it like a 10 out of 10, is that I think some of the slapsticky humor, it just goes on a little too long for me. Like the first, I'd say 35 to 40 minutes of this movie really relies heavily on the humor. And I think that's to get the kids hooked, because the second half of this movie does get kind of dark and kind of violent, and there's lots of fighting, and I understand that. But I would have been okay if they had done half as many silly jokes as they did. It still would have worked with half as many, and it would have been much funnier. Like, I think a lot of the early banter between Flynn Rider and Rapunzel, it just goes on for so long. That's where it reminded me the most of, oh, they're just doing Shrek. Like, this is Shrek right here. And so I think when the movie kind of like phases out of, we're making fun of princess movies and just kind of owns the fact that, like, yes, we are a princess movie, I think it actually gets much better from that point on. So I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on I don't want to call it the slapstick humor, but the silliness of the first half of the movie. Do you feel like it works completely, or do you understand how I say that I think it's a little shaggy?
I think I'd want to hear a few specific instances of the shagginess. Because for me, I think that a lot of the banter between Rapunzel and Flynn, once again, I think it's an example of Disney not overdoing it. Like, you can tell that they're not necessarily flirting with one another. They're genuinely just like kind of poking at each other to see what each other's limits are. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of being silly teenagers, they realize slowly that they're starting to like each other. And so for me, a lot of that banter helps kind of set the stage slowly for why they would fall in love, as opposed to, movies where the characters just randomly fall in love after a day and you're just kind of like, well, that doesn't feel realistic, but suspension of disbelief, whatever. This, I don't feel like I have to suspend much disbelief to think that they would fall in love.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that I can't pinpoint a specific moment of dialogue off the top of my head right now, but in terms of the slapsticky stuff, I do think there's a moment where, they're being chased the first time and they come to that huge like ravine, and she swings her hair to get out of there, and then she throws her hair back to him and he's swinging on it. And he hits this enormous like plank that's sticking out of the face of the cliff in a way that's like, oh, you would be dead. And I know that it's a cartoon, but even in a movie like, I don't know, The Lion King or whatever, like, I don't know if they would defy physics quite that much, because my man's spinal cord would have just come out the back of him if he
it felt like a road.
If he had really hit it that hard.
It felt like a Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote type of
little
moment.
bit, yeah. And, you know, again, I think I have a lower tolerance for that stuff than a lot of people do. It doesn't ruin the movie or anything, but I just think they go a little overboard with it.
I think that you're, as far as talking about things that would kill you in this movie, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Have you ever held a cast iron skillet?
It's funny you should say that. We just invested in our first, cast iron purchase a few months ago, and I've been trying to cook as much as I can on it. Those things are like insanely heavy.
Dude, I have so much respect for two movie characters. They are Rapunzel and Samwise Gamgee, because those people are destroying enemies with freaking cast iron pans. You gotta be jacked to be whacking people with those things.
Well, and not just wielding them, but like, Sam walked to Mordor with a 48-pound pan skillet in his backpack. Like,
yeah, dude. Yeah, man, I am highly impressed with that. I think an example of me for a little bit of Shaggy humor, she knocks out Flynn Rider like too many times when they're in her tower.
Yes.
I think that if there's anything that goes on a little bit too long, I think getting her out of the tower is important, and it's a turning point in the movie. And I think that it should have happened a little bit sooner.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, and I think that's probably the part that I'm referring to most. I don't want to dwell on it because it is nitpicky, but I do have a remaining 2 items on my nitpick list if you'd like to hear them.
I want to hear the third one and then the second one. We're going to go 1, 3, 2.
Oh, perfect. All right, man. All right, so here's my nitpick. If you are, what's the witch's name?
Gothel.
All right. I was almost said Gollum because now we're talking about Lord of the Rings. So if you are the witch Gollum,
just Andy Serkis voicing her mother.
Here's the biggest problem with her plot to keep Rapunzel as her own daughter forever. All right, like, you've kidnapped a baby, you've taken her to live with you forever, and you've very clearly, obviously, not taught her about her own origins. Why would you teach her that her birthday is her birthday?
Yep.
Why wouldn't you just make up, like, yeah, your birthday is April 15th, tax day every year. You know what I mean? Like, why does it have to be the actual birthday of Rapunzel? If she had just taught her that was just some random day, like, oh, that's what they do on, the 4th of July in this kingdom, then Rapunzel would never have even inquired about these things.
Yeah. Also, if we really want to get in the weeds, how did she know exactly which day Rapunzel was born? Because, like, she didn't steal Rapunzel for, probably a week or 2 after she was born.
Yeah.
It's like, how does she know the exact day?
Also, how terrible were the guards at that castle? Because that scene where she kidnaps the baby, there's just a screen door right next to the crib, and she just pops that bad boy open. She's in and out. Like, there's no security.
Does she have, like, teleportation capabilities? Because, like Flynn is a young 20-year-old man in the peak of his athleticism, and he had a heck of a time escaping from the castle. Like,
all right, so here's my third nitpick, because I don't know if it's covered anywhere in the lore of, like, the beginning of the movie, but at the end of the movie, Flynn goes to rescue Rapunzel because she's been trapped in the tower again by the witch Gollum, and he comes in and she stabs Flynn, and he's lying on the ground bleeding to death. And Rapunzel says that she's going to heal him, and he's trying to convince her not to. And he says, "If you heal me, you will die." And I said, "What? Like, when did we establish that? Like, where was that established, Brad? Was that established?"
Oh, no, dude. I think that essentially he's saying, like, your spirit will be killed. Because she promised Gothel, if you let me heal him, I'll come with you. I will sacrifice my independence. I'll sacrifice my agency. And so Flynn basically was like, if you do that, it will kill you.
Okay. I thought that part of the reason that he, like, actually ended up physically cutting her hair off was because he thought that, I thought it was like one of those dumb situations like in the Rise of Skywalker where, like, if she gives him all of her force, then she'll die. Do you know what I'm saying?
You're just giving me all of the things I hate about Disney today.
What I'm saying is he's basically Kylo Ren. That's the point I'm making here today.
I hate you. No, I understand. I kind of understand where you're coming from. I genuinely took it as more of a like spiritual, like your soul will die if you submit to this bondage and captivity. And I would rather myself die to set you free.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why for me, like, I haven't said it yet, but for me, one of the reasons I love this movie so much is that it feels so similar to me to Beauty and the Beast. There are so many parts of this film of a young woman on an adventure that at the end of the film, she's faced with the death of someone she loves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet in this movie, it advances the plot. It shows that this man is willing to sacrifice his life for her freedom. And that there's just something about that message that is so beautiful to me. You know, I like Bob and I have talked about it before. We both have Bible degrees. We both do church stuff. We love Jesus. For me, I think Tangled is one of the most beautiful representations of what Christ did for us in his death on the cross, his sacrifice that he made so that we might have choice against sin, against the darkness in this world, that we might have an ability to move beyond the things that hold us in captivity and bondage. And like that for me, like this watch through just really hit me hard. And I'm along for that ride.
I feel so dumb making the comparison that I'm about to make because you were comparing it to other movies and I was like, oh, I have a movie to compare it to. And then you're like, Jesus, that's who I'm comparing this to. I'm like, oh man, now I can't say my thing. All right. Well, I'm still going to say it anyway.
Go ahead and say your thing.
Right.
I'll make fun of you.
Right,
It'll be fine.
I do want to say though, part of the reason that I like this movie a lot is because it is an homage to a lot of other really good movies in ways that Disney didn't do before. And Brad, just to rack your brain on films we've watched for this podcast, can you remember another movie that was a romance movie or a romantic comedy where, the guy is a little full of himself and eventually that's worn down. And at the end of the movie, the couple gets together and the movie ends with both of them directly addressing the audience about how they got together and why they're happy with each other.
Harry and Sally.
Yeah. This movie has... that ending narration is When Harry Met Sally in Disney form.
Oh, dude, I didn't even think about that.
It was so cool to just be like, oh yeah, I like that they're doing this. Like it's a nice little nod to a classic of the genre, and I'm totally on board for it.
Yeah, dude.
So there it is. Your comparison, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and my comparison is When Harry Met Sally.
Billy Crystal sex symbol.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we're at as a podcast, folks. That's the two poles of extremes that you're listening to today. So, Brad, I think it's time for us to give our final scores on this movie. I'll go first because it's your movie. I'll let you wrap us up here. I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. I really love this movie a lot. I don't think it's perfect. I do think that first 35-ish minutes could have been trimmed a little bit if they wanted to. But man, does the back half of this thing just move really, really well. Like it just, once it gets going, it's really going. And it becomes honestly one of the better movies that Disney has made, so far this century. So for me, it's a 9 out of 10.
Man, I just am struggling, Bob. I want to give this movie a 9.5. I feel like I want really though to give it a 10. For me, I think my Disney animated film list has come down to Beauty and the Beast in the top spot, Tangled in the second spot, wow, Aladdin in third, Lion King in fourth.
Man.
And everything after that, it can come or go. There's some good ones, but those are like my top four. And so for me, I don't know, man, this watch through, I was just blown away. And I genuinely came into thinking about Tangled, thinking I'd give it an 8.5 to 9, maybe a 9.5 if I really love it. But this time through, man, I really fell in love with this movie again. It'd been probably 3 or 4 years since I'd seen it.
Hey,
I think I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10.
Hey, I was going to say, you're stalling now. You need to just pull the trigger on this score, man. 10 out of 10. All right. So that brings us to an average of a 9.5 out of 10, but we'd like to know what you think. Where does Tangled fall in your Disney pantheon? Let us know. You can reach out to us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @FilmWhiskey.
Or if you want to engage with us personally, check out our Discord. We have so many amazing folks just hanging out, talking whiskey, talking movies, talking trucking, talking all the best things that you can imagine. The link to jump onto our Discord is found in every single set of show notes.
Well, Brad, it is time for us to spin the wheel for next week's movie. We have no idea which movie it's going to be, but we do know it's going to be one from my list, which is now down to 13 movies. However, Brad and I were talking the other day of like, oh man, I wish I had been able to squeeze this movie into my list or this movie into my list. And I told Brad, listen, if we're going to do this, if we're second guessing our lists, we should do this now where we give ourselves like a mulligan. We have one do-over. We can remove one movie from our list and substitute it with another movie if we really want to. And Brad, I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to take a movie off my list. And the movie that I'm going to take off is, let's see, I'm looking through them now. I'm going to take off the movie Out of the Furnace, which I really, really like, but it is a downer of a movie, and I don't really feel like doing that this year. So I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to replace it with my animated movie for this season, and it's going to be Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is totally not a downer at all, written by the same guy that did Les Miserables, known for his cheery disposition, Victor Hugo. But I love the Disney version of this movie. I feel like no one talks about it. And especially like as a grown-up, listening to the way the music is orchestrated and looking at that incredible animation, I appreciate that movie now way more than I ever would have as a kid. So I'm going to put The Hunchback in here.
Man, I'm literally looking at my list and I'm trying to decide which one I want to get rid of because I really have to add The Prince of Egypt into my list. I guess we're just adding in animated films left and right here. I think The Prince of Egypt has some of the best music ever written for any movie of all time. I think that Ralph Fiennes, going back to season 1, Ralph Fiennes, top 5 voice acting performances of all time for me. So Prince of Egypt has to go in. I'm going to let you choose. Do you want me to get rid of The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, or Arrival? Because, I'm struggling. The reason I put The Day the Earth Stood Still is because I honestly haven't seen the movie since I was probably 11 or 12. But I just remember watching that movie as a 7 or 8-year-old for the first time and just thinking it was the freaking coolest thing in the world. And I was like, I'm going to throw that on there.
All right, I think take off The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to watch it with us, man. It's just too old. And I hate to say that because that's what we do here. Yeah. But I think more of our listeners have seen Arrival and they probably want to hear us delve into that one a little bit more. Dude. Let's do Arrival.
All right, I'm in. So The Day the Earth Stood Still is gone. And in its place, we have The Prince of Egypt.
I love it. All right, man, I'm going to spin the wheel with my new entry. And we'll see where we land here. So, Brad, because I can't share the audio from this tab, can you make some wheel clicking sounds for me?
Click, 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 click.
Do. Oh, interesting. We're going to be watching one of my favorite movies from a script writing standpoint next week, Brad. And I'm going to give you a challenge, all right? When you watch this movie, I want you to keep the captions on the whole time you watch it and just read along with it because the dialogue in this movie is so good. It is the George Clooney directed 2005 film Good Night and Good Luck. Can't wait for that one, man. Oh, I'm pumped.
I'm in. Good night. Well, I guess I'll just finish this off then, Bob. Good night and good luck.
For the Film and Whiskey Podcast, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.